I am so excited to have y'all on another episode of A Superwoman Handbook. As you know, this handbook was not something I sought out to make. It's been something I've been led to do. And so I love when I have moments like what just happened with our guest, Debbie. We had met earlier and kind of outlined what she was going to talk about today. She's a mother of nine. I'll intro with that. But it was placed on her heart this morning to share a different topic. And so I love this platform to be there for situations just like this. So, Debbie, tell us about your nine kids.
Yeah, so I'm excited to be here. So I'll give you a little bit of the back journey first for that. But I was a person I've always been a person who could accomplish things and get things done. And I had determined early on that I was going to be a young grandma. And lo and behold, you got to get married, you got to have kids, then you get grandkids. There's an order, right? For me, that was my plan. And then when I started walking my plan, infertility was in the picture for 4 or 5 years. And then we were fortunate enough to get pregnant with quads. And I thought, okay, that's how I'm going to do this. And so we went on that journey only for those boys to be born at 26 weeks and to pass away in my arms. And that was not, I go to the hospital with a plan to celebrate, and here I am planning funerals. And I just had to learn to figure my way through that. I always trusted God, but it was in that hospital room that night that I said, I'm going to trust you, and you're going to show me how to figure my way. And He did. He was faithful. He said, take the next best step that I could think of. And then He met me there, and then He did it again and did it again. And that's the journey of healing. And then somewhere in there, I asked a different question. I started asking, how do I thrive? Because I don't want to be the same person in 30 years, just kind of numb, and I want to live. And He began to open doors and opportunities for me that I never would have dreamed of. And that is how we landed on adopting 3 times, and we have 9 children, 3 sibling groups that all come from very hard places and have had different abuse, neglect, trauma in their lives. And it's been a real privilege to be their mama, but that's how I became a mama. And then on my journey to being a grandma, they have eventually made me a grandma. So now I have about 15 grandkids, and I don't get to see all of them all the time, but I'm a young grandma. And so God fulfilled that dream of my heart. But He also placed other dreams on my heart as I let Him answer that question of how do I thrive. So He had me start a nonprofit, which is called Anchor Point. And Anchor Point is a very large ministry now. I probably raise several million in a year, and it impacts thousands of families. And so I'm CEO there. It's 15 years old. I built it from scratch. And by the grace of God, by all stretch of the imagination, is the only way we've got it done. But it is super wonderful to see that He's doing that. And then He said, write a book. And I'm like, you got the wrong girl. And I'm like, okay, I'll write the book. But you can get this picture that I am this high level executive, built things through the trenches. I have children who have challenges, who need help learning how to work through their own recoveries. I've had children as they've turned into adults that have made choices I would not make for them. I've had one that was a prostitute on the streets for a while, and that was really hard. I had another that fell in love with drugs and had addiction and was on the streets, living homeless for 6, 7 years. I had another one that sold drugs, had another one that got a felony. I'm the Geraldo show. So if you look at my parenting life, it's not always been easy, but God has been faithful. And these are the children that God has given me to walk alongside. And I love my kiddos, and God is writing a good story in their lives, even as they've made these kind of wayward decisions. God is still drawing on their hearts. But as the ministry grows, as I'm dealing with my adult kids and stuff like that, when we went through COVID, I had an employee that had to work from home, but had an office job, and we were still open all during that time, serving in our ministry and helping. So I'm working her job, I'm working my job, and and then you got all these other things pile on. So you know what we do sometimes? We often, this is me, I won't judge anybody else. What I do is I just figure out how to make my way. So I slurped my way through on Cokes, and probably didn't eat very healthy. Made some other choices over the years. I'm a meat and potato girl. I don't like vegetables, and so I'm running on such high energy, stress, all this stuff, and figuring my way. I don't even realize I'm stressed. But what happened is that sometimes we'll just go, and if we keep going, our body eventually just can't handle it. And so in November, about 4 years ago, I was getting out of a truck and I was talking to my husband. It was in the middle of a lawsuit. Okay. So I had a lawsuit going on and I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just getting everything off my chest before we walk into a Bible study. We're getting out of the truck. I have the plate in my hand and I'm talking, and I grabbed the truck door and I shut it, and it dug into the front of my leg and dug a big hole in it. And so it starts bleeding everywhere. And, I'm a pretty calm girl. So I'm like, my husband's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I need you to breathe. We're going to survive this. Give me something to put on the thing. It's bleeding everywhere. I'm sitting in this person's yard I don't know." And I'm like, nurses are in my small group. They come running out. They're like, "You got to go to the hospital. You got to go to the hospital." I'm like, "Fine." So we go to the hospital, and it's a pretty deep gash. It's probably about almost half an inch deep. So it's a pretty deep one, and it's bleeding everywhere. And so we get to the hospital, and I like to see everything, so I watched them do everything, and they stitched it up, and I thought, I need to become a doctor because I stitch better than that dude does. But anyway, he stitched me up, and I was supposed to be good. And off I go. I'm still doing my job, all this good stuff. And lo and behold, that thing gets infected. And I end up, after about 7 days, I'm like, that just really looked bad. And my nurse practitioner was like, "I think that's infected." And so I found a wound doctor, and I went to the wound doctor, and he was like, "They should have never stitched it." And he ripped it all out. I was like, "That's great." And so off we start again. And I started trying to get better with a bunch of different things that he had me doing, and I didn't get better. I continued to get worse. It broke out with a staph infection. It was getting big and inflamed and all this stuff. And ultimately, after about 100 days, that doctor told me, "If you're not better by next week, you're going to the hospital to stay until they get this closed up." And I'm like, "I am not going to the hospital." I'm like, "I don't know how I do this, but I'm not going to the hospital." And I had one of my nutritionist friends, I got a hold of him, and I'm like, "Can you fix this hole in me? I can't fix this hole in me. I don't know how to, I mean, like, how do you do that? I don't know how to do that." And he said yes. And so we did very few things, and we were able to get blood down there so that the blood could heal, because the blood gives life. And that was the problem. I couldn't get the blood down there. So what was really happening was, what my body was saying was, "You know what? We realize there's an injury down there, but we're doing everything we can, because you are in such a bad place, to keep your heart pumping, to keep you breathing, to do the essential things. You can lose your leg, but you can't live if you're not breathing." And so my body was doing everything it could, but it had nothing to use. It had nothing to use. And I am highly stressed out, but I don't even realize that I am, just based on my life and everything with kids, everything that I'm doing. And so we managed, over a period of about nine and a half months, to get that wound closed and get the staph infection tapped down, get a lot of it out of there. I have a nice, beautiful scar to remind me for the rest of my life. And when I went through all that, I just dawned on me that there's probably something in me that needs to change. That something's not, because I really should be dead, because it was that bad. And I remember sitting down with my nutritionist guy, and I was like, "Okay, there must be something." He's a Christian and I am too. And I'm like, there must be something for me to learn here, because I don't think it's time. I want to be a young grandma, remember? So I'm like, I just got the grandkids. I can't like take off now. And I'm like, I need to figure something out because the way I'm doing life is not working. And he asked me a question. He asked me a question of on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being none, and 10 being like, whoa, how much stress I thought I had in my life right then. And I said, I don't know. It's not too bad right now. Now, remember in your head, 9 kids, wayward children, trauma background, CEO, doing someone else's job, plus my job, plus a lawsuit. You can just get the whole picture, right? Okay. And I was like, well, this is not too bad today. It's a 3. I don't really think I have stress. And he was so shocked. He just looked at me and he goes, "You are lying." And I'm like, "Do you say this to all your patients?" I'm like, "I'm not lying." I said, I don't really feel stressed today. Today's a good day." And he has a way of muscle testing it out of me, and your body won't lie. And he wants you to be under 20 on this muscle test. And I was 140. And he goes, "You're stressed." And I'm like, okay. And the more I thought about it as I continued on this journey, and he started working with me, and we did some supplementation, and because I'm a really mature believer for the most part. And so that's probably why I've survived so far. But I'm like, okay, as we were able to teach my body to calm down using various different things, it was such a foreign feeling to me that I didn't even, I'm like, this feels weird. I just need to go get in bed and sleep for like 6 months. Or I found myself sitting in a staff meeting and I was so calm. I was almost laughing hysterically. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? And it was because my body is like, this feels good. This feels good. This feels right. And so over the last 4 years, I have learned that I need to be very attuned to what my body is telling me. And it took a while for me to even figure out what it feels like to not feel stressed. And so now I don't run at 140, I run around between 35 to 55, which is still above 20, right? But I can tell you that I can now tell when my body starts to go the wrong direction. And when it starts to go the wrong direction, I can then employ different techniques, whether it is a supplement or whether it is prayer or leaning into God or removing myself from a situation. But I can do things that can begin to bring that back down. Because what I know is that if it goes up, then my health is going to go south, and I'm not going to be able to be the leader and mother and grandmother that I need to be in these situations. And as we look across our world today, there's just more and more stress and more anxiety, and we have to learn how to deal with it. And God says that we can have peace and joy in all situations. My body wasn't having peace and joy, so that was 4 years ago. And then about 4 months ago, I had a little stressful situation with some grandchildren and a daughter trying to leave an abusive situation, and they were in my house. And my daughter was struggling, and so I'm having to pick up the mom role. And when I adopted, my youngest kid was 6, and she has a 4, 3, and 18-month-old. I was not prepared. I love these kids, but I like being grandma, and she was really not that capable of dealing with her stuff at that point. And so now I'm grandma watching her waver between a bad situation and a worse situation. And I am wanting to do certain things with the kids, but she's taking them. And so I am kind of getting in this tug of war. So the stress level in me goes up. And it turns out that I got a little sick. And when I got sick, the staph infection broke out again on my backside. And it was beautiful right on my high hip back there. I'm like, how do you put a bandage on that? And it's big. It's like this big. And I'm like, how do you deal with that? And so I know how to do wound care. So we started dealing with it and working on it and stuff like that. But the stress was so great. And I'm telling you, I knew all these techniques. I knew how to pray about this. I knew all this stuff now. And I break out in shingles on top of that. And that was because the stress was so great and my body couldn't handle it. And then again, it was like back where my wound was on my leg, it broke out in my leg again. So much so that it put me in the bed, that I couldn't walk hardly. And I still had to work. I worked from the bed and I did meetings on Zoom from the bed and managed to do the things. But what it began to teach me this time, because this has been about a 17-week journey that I've been on, is that I am not leaning in enough to the Holy Spirit working in me. God has promised me that by his stripes I am healed. And I had my eyes in the wrong place. I'm looking at the wound. I'm looking at it expanding. I'm looking at, and I'm not keeping my eyes on Jesus. I am not walking out a proactive faith journey to say, sickness is not me. And so for the last few weeks, God has been reteaching me these things and challenging me to rise up and lean in. And I think a great story is, when the Israelites were standing at the water and they couldn't see their way, God had gone before them, but the water had covered his footprints. And so it wasn't till he parted the water that they could see that he was leading the way. So, I can't see some days right now as my body finishes this healing process, but I can believe and I can lean in faith and trust that what he says in his word is true, that by his stripes I am healed, that I am whole, that I am healthy. And I can learn to do better for me. So for you guys today, the story is stress is real and it is killing us and it is hurting us, and we have to be able to figure it out. And so that's really a little bit about what's rolling around in me today.
I am I'm so happy that you shared that story and that you felt called to share it, because I feel like it's so on point in so many ways for what we need to hear right now. I heard this saying, I don't know who said it, but it said, things will whisper, speak, and then yell. And that's the first thing that came to mind, was that you hit the car door hitting your leg. That was the yelling. That was what was to get your attention. And so you mentioned a couple things that you had been, kind of, besides just your health, what else did you walk away from that moment committing to make changes to?
With the accident with my leg, it was definitely my health. It was all consuming. I mean, and it really was. I was not capable of not becoming a mother. So that was still there. And I was not capable of, or did not feel that God was letting me go from the job that I had at Anchor Point. I did have as I went through the lawsuit, had one of our very wealthy donors. I was sitting down with him and I'm like, I know you get sued all the time. How do you deal with this? And I'm like, I got one. And I'm like, I'm in a puddle. And he's like, you have to realize that when you get sued, you're doing something right. And you've made it. And I said, I've made it? Okay, I need to change my perspective. So I think, focusing really, really, really on my health, and then my perspective, what I think, what I say, what I hear, all the things that I let in my space, I have to protect that. That is the other thing, because like you said, Satan is out here yelling and wanting to get in. So if I'm, I told you when you first got on, I was listening to music because I was struggling a little bit today. And I'm like, okay, God, give it to me. I'm listening, and so I'm like putting that in, because I have to battle to do the things that he's called me to do, because Satan is very interested in taking us out. And sickness, stress, all those things are just things of this world that are meant to distract us. And so I'm going, okay, God, I got it. Show me how to do it.
The other thing that really resonated to me was your stress. I think if you asked me or anyone listening what our stress was, we'd all say a 3. So, it's for those that are just home by themselves. What could you frame for them to look in the mirror and say to themselves or ask themselves, like, really, what is your stress level? Because I think I would lie to myself.
Yeah, so I would tell you what Dr. Chapa told me. You lied. But I'm going, no. I mean, I'm going, really? Stand still, be quiet, close your eyes. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, just ask the Holy Spirit if you're stressed. He'll tell you. But your body gives you signs. Are you having bowel movements every day? If you're not, you're stressed. If you feel your heart pounding, you're stressed. If you feel like your thoughts aren't clear and you're scattered and you're just overwhelmed, you're stressed. So you can begin to look. So it's easy. Like when you hear me tell you like all the things I have going on in my life, you're like, well, duh, of course you're not a 3. And I'm going, yes, I am. So, tell a friend, phone a friend and say, hey, get on my website and tell me, I'll tell you. But phone a friend and say, I got this, and this going on. Where do you think I am on my stress scale? If safe people will speak truth to us and tell us. And, I would go, most of us, I can't think, the truth is, most of us are already above 5. Easy. Easy. Because we just don't, if we don't realize it, then we're already there. And unless I can go retire, put my house out by this beautiful water where I see mountains in the background and I can spend 6, 7, 8 hours studying God's word and someone cooks for me and I get to go walking and I get to do all these things. You know what? The fact of the matter is our world changes too fast. Facebook, everything else puts pressure on us. Jobs put pressure. Children's put pressure. You're just not going to be, you got to be at least aware that you're fighting this. So
I like that. They said you can't fix a problem you don't accept. So first being aware. And I'm glad that you really highlight it because I think partially it is a badge of honor. And that was one thing I realized with COVID, how it wasn't until I detoxed, until the music stopped and I was just forced to sit in the quiet with myself, I realized, oh my gosh, I was living a crazy life. Like, because when you're in it, you're so in it. So I'm so glad that you kind of hit this pause button to get people to kind of self-reflect and say, hey, well, how am I really feeling? Not just kind of how am I going with the flow? And so I like that you mentioned your website because that was my next question. So let's say someone's at home and they're like, I think I am maybe stressed. I think I might need some tools. Where would you send them for resources?
Oh, well, first of all, one of the things you can do is get safe friends that can help you process through this because really the way we walk through any challenge is we need to do it in community of safe believers and everything that will reflect with us, but also at the same time still see our preciousness and the hope that we still have when some days I can't see it. So like this morning, I was really struggling and I texted a friend and I'm like, I need you to, here's my deals, and I need you to write me a proactive prayer and send it back to me that I can use. And they did. And I was like, okay, I can at least voice that now, and so I'm like, I'm hanging on to that. So you need that. You can always go to my website, which is thedebbisimmons.com. And then what I'll give you is also something you can put in the notes is that you guys can have the best strategy, which is a free download. I just need to give you the link for it. But it will allow you to figure out what is the next best step you ought to be taking. Because when we walk in obedience and faith and take the next best step that we can think of, what for us, and it's different for all of us, then God faithfully meets us. And then he does that again. He taught me that with the boys and working through grief after losing the boys to trust him with that. And so he's, when I had the lawsuit, same thing. I don't know what the heck I do. What's the next best step? And I'm like, maybe I should call the attorney. Yeah, that's a good step. Okay, do that, and then I'll figure this out. Do that and figure this out. God's very faithful like that. And so I would just go get that next best strategy and use that in your life for big issues. Maybe it's some big goal that God has given you. Starting a business, whatever it is, this applies there. Dealing with a lawsuit, dealing with loss of children, dealing with stress. All of these things, I do it the same way. I just ask, how in the heck do I get through this? And then breathe, and what's the next best step? And then ultimately, I'll get to a place where I'm in a much better place, and I can change the question to, how do I thrive? How do I live? How do I do this, God? Because for your glory, and I want to be a person who's living. And so those are all tips that you can get on the website, the thedebbiesimmons.com.
I like how you kind of framed that, and I think that's a good thing to kind of leave our listeners with. I focus so much on surviving, getting through the day, just getting all the dishes done, just getting all my emails done, just being a good wife, I never thought to be so gluttonous, for lack of a better word, to think about how do I thrive.
Right.
And so I was so glad that you brought that concept for us today so that everyone can kind of go back and reflect on that. Am I surviving or thriving? And it's definitely brought some reflection for me to get sorted, kind of how to thrive from here, because we do get so caught in the cycle. So I'm so glad we had this conversation today. I'm so glad it was placed on your heart to kind of redirect our topic, because I know that means that there's someone me probably, who needed to hear this today.
Or it could just
and it's
be
going to
me
be
talking to myself. I'm like, okay, you remember this morning. That's probably true.
very true. Well, I loved having you on, and thank you so much. We'll make sure we get all that posted so folks can find your content and find your resources.